Taiwan, baby.
Taiwan.
To this day.
To this day. To this day.
To this day.
Motherfucking really. We're covering today's top boxing news.
All right, we'll start with this. Well, Luis Nery is expected to bring on Eddie Reynoso as his new trainer. That is the same Eddie Reynoso who trains both Canelo Alvarez, Oscar Valdez, Ryan Garcia. It does appear that Eddie Reynoso has landed yet another all-star client. In the last quarter of 2019, Luis Nery was paired up with Freddie Roach in preparation for what was to be the Emmanuel Rodriguez fight, though we all know what happened. Luis Nery blew the weight, Emmanuel Rodriguez didn't want to go through with it, yada yada yada, here we are.
Yep.
And I just wonder what the real nature of the change in trainers is. Why didn't he just stay with Freddie Roach?
Good question.
Because, you know, if he's experiencing any kind of issues, they aren't necessarily issues with his technique, his implementation as a fighter. Luis Nery's biggest issue seems to be making the weight.
Yeah.
And one is left to wonder, okay, well, what are you going to get from Eddie Reynoso that you weren't getting from Freddie Roach?
Yeah, fair question.
I mean, he has since moved up in weight. That seems to be the course of action that they're taking, that Luis Nery has outgrown the bantamweight division, and from here on out, he's going to be campaigning as a super bantamweight. So that more or less resolves the issue right then and there, in which case,
Why change trainers?
why not just proceed as a super bantamweight under the tutelage of Freddie Roach? Why enlist the aid of Eddie Reynoso? What can he do for you that Freddie Roach wasn't doing?
Glenbow State.
Yeah, I'll pick 2 of those with a glass of lemonade, please.
Hey, listen, I'm not trying to attack anybody's character. I'm just taking what information is made available to the boxing public and using that information to connect the dots as to why Luis Nery has so decided to move forward with Eddie Reynoso as opposed to Freddie Roach or someone else. Why Eddie? You know, it just so happens that Canelo Alvarez tested positive for a weight-cutting agent and clenbuterol, and so did Luis Nery. He tested positive for a weight-cutting agent.
Did y'all forget?
And Luis Nery's biggest issue doesn't seem to be a tactical or technical flaw that he needs to work on, or attempting to be a different fighter, perhaps adopting a different base style. That doesn't appear to be the nature of Luis Nery's problem. The nature of his problem is that the guy was struggling to make the weight. But if you already moved up in weight, if your very next fight is going to be within the super bantamweight limit as opposed to the bantamweight limit, which was harder for you to make, if you've already taken care of that and you've decided to move up, then what do you need Eddie Reynoso for?
Huh?
I mean, I'm just trying to understand, that's all, because Luis Nery is still an undefeated fighter. You know, he's not a guy on the rebound looking to make a change, per se.
He's not?
A change to his implementation. That's not really what's going on. If anything's going on, it's that Luis Nery was struggling to make bantamweight, but now he's going to be campaigning as a super bantamweight. You know, that's really about it. And, you know, left to its own devices, the imagination can run wild with all sorts of speculations, but when I heard this, that's what immediately came to mind.
Just being honest, fellas.
You know, I thought to myself, you know, I heard this story, and I just thought to myself, in all my wisdom, I says, what's he going to get from Eddie that he wasn't already getting? And I guess the answer to the question is, I don't know, better masking agents?
Let me get 2 medium rare Glenbow steak,
What's the side?
side of potato salad.
Coming right up.
Yeah, maybe he'll get him on the Canelo Alvarez diet, to where Canelo can go from 160 to 168, back down to 160, up to 175, and in all likelihood back down to 168, without the fluctuations hurting his performance. Maybe that's on the itinerary. That is what is on the docket for Luis Nery now that he is under the tutelage of Eddie Reynoso. I know that I'm being a bit cynical, and I admit
You are.
that I'm jumping to conclusions based on what available information there already is in regards to both Luis Nery, Eddie Reynoso, and Canelo Alvarez. You'll forgive me for saying so, but I'm just a bit tired of hearing the very convenient explanation that it was the cows, that it was the contaminated meat. I mean, we heard that very recently when it came to Ray Vargas, the WBC Super Bantamweight champion, ahead of his fight. We just heard this, and I'm just a little bit tired of hearing it. But specific to Luis Nery, I think that this is one of the more obvious cases that a guy was, caught red-handed, because is it a coincidence that for the first Yamanaka fight, this guy tested positive? In the subsequent rematch, he blows the weight. That once he's under the hot lights and it's not safe to do whatever it was you were doing, you blow the weight. And ever since, you've blown the weight. Is that really a coincidence? It's almost insulting to one's intelligence to suggest that this guy wasn't using a weight-cutting agent. So when I see that he's enlisting the aid of Eddie Reynoso, I can't help but be a bit cynical, because as we all know, Eddie Reynoso's fighter, very famously, tested positive for a weight-cutting agent as well. And the implication with a weight-cutting agent is that it's not so much adding something to your performance, but it is a shortcut. That's what it is. That's the implication. That on one end, you might have a fighter who's got to go through hell and back to make the weight, the hard way, the clean way, and on the other end, you might have a guy who resorts to using a weight-cutting agent to fast-track him there. So the night of the fight, one of these guys might be more energized because he wasn't kicking his own ass trying to make the weight. He used a cheat code. That is the implication. I'm not going to tell you that Canelo Alvarez is a bad fighter or that he doesn't have any skills, and I'm not going to tell you that Luis Nery is a bad fighter who doesn't have any skills. I'm going to tell you that these are guys who have been caught with weight-cutting agents in their system, so that makes me suspicious of them. That makes me suspicious of what they do. Canelo fluctuates in weight more than anybody, okay? He fluctuates quite a bit. Some people would find that suspicious because for all the fluctuating he does, it doesn't seem to hurt his performance, his ability to perform. And I feel like if Luis Nery has sought out the aid of Eddie Reynoso, it's because he wants some kind of an advantage. That's what I'm thinking, and you can feel free to disagree, because after all, these are speculations. This is me just brainstorming as to what he hopes to get from Eddie that he wasn't getting from Freddie.
It is said in some boxing circles that a good number of elite-level boxers are doping, and the thing about it is they just haven't been caught. But it's probably a greater number than the fight fans realize, and you know what? That's something you could entertain. You can't put anything past anybody. Almost anything, most everything looks suspicious these days, given that VADA and just anti-doping as a whole is more present in today's boxing environment than it has ever been. And a lot of people have gotten caught. A lot of people have tested positive for something, whether it was for weight-cutting agents or some form of anabolic steroids or testosterone boosters. So you'll excuse my cynicism. But if I have cynicism, it's because, well, these guys did get caught with stuff in their system before. It didn't come out of nowhere. I'm not just pulling this stuff out of my ass and trying to make you smell it, Jesus Christ, what kind of a parallel is that?
Bit more tact from you for your next analogy, my lad. That was far too crude for those who may be listening.
Okay, well, my apologies to the princes and princesses who may be listening on that last analogy, but the same applies. I'm not pulling this stuff out of my ass. I'm not making this stuff up. If I'm suspicious of these individuals, it is because they have given me reason to be suspicious of them. So when I see Luis going to Eddie, I'm thinking to myself, he wants that Canelo Alvarez diet. He wants to get his hands on those Clenbow steaks. In truth, I don't even think making weight is his biggest problem anymore, because I reiterate, he has since moved up. I think the biggest problem that Luis Nery faces moving forward is getting in there with quality competition, because he's a PBC guy, and it just so happens that none of the belts at either bantamweight or super bantamweight are on the PBC side of the street. I've said this many times that in many ways the PBC's two guys, they're two bigger names in the bantamweight and super bantamweight divisions, Rigo and Luis. These guys have got a problem because none of the world titles, the full titles, are on the PBC side of things. So will the PBC allow these fighters to have a one-off and go somewhere else to bring back a belt? Because if they're not, then that's really the nature of Luis Nery's problem, that he's not going to be able to fight the who's who guys at either bantamweight or super bantamweight because they're not PBC fighters, and we all know PBC wants to keep things in-house. Anyway, make of that what you will. In 140-pound news, a tweet per Michael Benson reads, Josh Taylor's next fight will likely take place in the UK in the spring, according to his new promoter's Top Rank. He could face a mandatory. IBF previously stated they would soon order him to defend against Apinun Kon Song. And this is an interesting bit of news for more reasons than one. We know that Josh Taylor has since paired up with the American promotional powerhouse Top Rank, and their platform is ESPN, which primarily caters to an American market. So Josh Taylor's next fight potentially landing in the United Kingdom begs a question. Who's going to be at the helm of promotions if the fight's over there? Is Top Rank attempting to stage a promotion in the United Kingdom, or will they call upon the aid of Frank Warren, UK promoter, I'm sure you've heard of him, who they're in bed with, who they've got ties to help stage the promotion on that side of the Atlantic Ocean so that they can show it here for the American public on ESPN+. I mean, there is a question there that, okay, well, you paired up with an American promoter, but your next fight is going to be over there in the UK.
The gist of it.
One would assume that, his next fight was going to be over here. I mean, that was the inference that most people were making, myself included, that he was going to try to make a name for himself here stateside, and I'm not really sure he's doing that by having his very next fight in the United Kingdom. Make of that what you will. Just as well,
It's Mando.
when it comes to his mandatory challenger, Apinun Konsong. This is a guy, 23 years old, statuesque for the weight, just like Josh, about 5'10", has primarily fought a lot of pedestrian-level competition. I mean, you can look down this guy's entire resume and you won't see much in terms of world-level opponents or top contenders, anything remotely familiar with the who's who guys at 140 pounds. He is undefeated. He's an orthodox fighter who sports a professional record of 16 wins, 13 knockouts, no losses. But those are 16 wins over pedestrian-level competition. Guy fights primarily out of Thailand, And if the fight goes down in the UK, like I said, it's possible they get Frank Warren to help them stage the card, or maybe MTK Global, who Josh Taylor has since signed an advisory deal. Maybe they'll take care of the card. Maybe they'll, stage it. That they have that within their ability to do. MTK Global is a bigger company than most boxing fans on this side of the world realize. It is well within their ability to stage this card on their own. I just wonder, if Josh means to get the big names and the big fights on this side of the world, why would he still be fighting over there? Not sure. I mean, maybe they don't feel they can sell that fight here as easily as they could sell it there, because Apinun, that guy don't got a name. If anybody's got a name, it's Josh, but Josh's name is more known over there
In the UK.
than over here.
In the US.
So, I don't know. I mean, it's a funny bit of news. He's just taking care of business while he waits for the big fight. We all know what the big fight is. The big fight is the Jose Ramirez fight. But we know that Jose Ramirez is booked right now. He's going to be fighting Victor Postol very soon, early next month. So, he's killing two birds with one stone, Josh. That's what he's doing. If he handles his mandatory now, that keeps his schedule open, at least with one of the world titles that he's holding. He still has the WBA and whatever mandatory they conjure up to be mindful of. But, the WBA, they do give their guys more wiggle room than, say, the IBF does. So you can see what the hierarchy of thought is. Apinun is largely untested at the world level, on the world stage. So in all likelihood, Josh makes it past this guy in good fashion. We're going to have a look at Apinun if the fight gets made as the fight date approaches. For now, these are just preliminary talks that are floating around. The guy ranked behind Apinun, Subriel Matias. You might remember that name because that's the same Subriel Matias that fought Maxim Dadachev on that fateful night where Maxim lost his life as a result of, head trauma. I happen to think that Subriel is a more formidable guy, arguably one of the most formidable guys you'll find in the IBF's rank standings. I think he would make for a more interesting opponent choice than this Apinun guy, though the ranks are what the ranks are, and we know that the IBF, they're straight shooters. They have been for a while now, and the number one contender in their rank standings is Apinun, and not Subriel Matias. Up until such a time as Subriel goes in there against a Rancis Bartholomew or a Regis Prograis or an Ivan Baranchyk, there really is going to be a question mark over that guy. He has all the makings of a dark horse in the 140-pound division. Good dimensions for the weight, very strong puncher, and he could turn out to be a somebody in the 140-pound division if given the opportunity, though for right now, as far as what the IBF has in store for their champion, it does appear to be Apinun Con Song. Take a little trip over to the WBA's rank standings, it being that Josh is not only the IBF but also the WBA champion, and there's a bit more familiarity there. There, you have the name of Louis Ritson at number 2, Rancis Bartholomew, Regis Prograis, Ives Ulysses Jr., a guy we haven't heard much from in some time. And the thing about the WBA is that, you know, they'll order a mandatory, but the question is for who? They've got Alberto Puello seated at number 1, and he is the interim champion. But as we all know, the WBA has any variety of belts, active belts that people are holding. You know, they've got Josh as the super champion, Mario Barrios as the world champion, Ismael Barroso as the WBA gold champion, and Alberto Puello as the interim champion. You have 4 different WBA champions all within the same division. So it really does leave a question of, okay, if at some point Josh Taylor is going to have to satisfy a mandatory for those guys, who's it going to be? Is it going to be the world champion, the gold champion, the interim champion, or are they going to order mandatories for those guys? I mean, you know, with the WBA, it can get very confusing, even for the seasoned fight fan.
Yeah?
That follows the sport as closely as me and you. Who knows who they'd order fucking Josh Taylor to fight? I don't know. When you have that many minor titles in circulation, any one of those guys is a viable option to become Josh Taylor's mandatory challenger. As it stands, we've heard of no order coming down yet. No mandate has been issued out. So I don't know, maybe they'll try to consolidate those titles before they order Josh to fight one of those 3 guys. I really don't know what they're going to do in that situation. We're already seeing talks of Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez being potential opponent options for Terrence Crawford. You know, the winner, what could be the winner of their fight, what could be the next undisputed champion at 140 pounds. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense, you know. You know, the next undisputed champion versus the former undisputed champion at that weight upon their arrival to the welterweight division where Crawford is currently the WBO champion. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but it's a bit early for those kinds of talks, a bit early for those kinds of conversations and propositions, because we're a ways out from that. At minimum, that won't happen for another year. Maybe more time than that.
1.5, 2.
Could be well over a year before we see the winner of Ramirez versus Taylor square off against Crawford. I happen to think that either Jose or Josh would relish the opportunity to fight Crawford. They're true fighters, true champions, not Mayweather wannabes. So I think they'd like the fight. I just think that it's too soon to start talking about that, because before we get that, those 2 guys, they gotta fight each other.
Yeah, they do.
And we're not there yet. When a fight is that far out, there's too much time in between then, what could be then, and now. A lot of things could happen that might alter your perception. So for me, it's just too soon to entertain those kinds of matchups.